Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope everyone is doing well. It's so cold. Oh my gosh, I'm freezing. I hope everyone is staying warm. So, today we're going to be discussing the difference between heuristic thinking and analytical thinking and why it's important to understand that difference. Also, how heuristic thinking can be used against us. In the last section, we are going to walk through an analytical exercise using this entire ice issue as our subject. And that's sort of why I made these cheerful, upbeat boards instead of our normal chalkboards, because it's sort of a depressing topic. Okay, let's do this. To understand heuristic thinking, we need to understand what heuristics are, what they're for, and the different types that exist. So, what are heuristics? In the 1970s, psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman introduced the concept of heuristics. They described heuristics as mental shortcuts in judgment, shortcuts that generally get us where we need to go quickly but at a cost, because they can often be unreliable. A heuristic is a mental shortcut that allows people to make decisions and solve problems fast and efficiently. Rather than relying on every available detail, heuristics rely on experience, intuition, and simplified strategies to reach a good enough solution. We use heuristics constantly throughout our daily lives. This is how our brains process basic information that doesn't require much thought, allowing for rapid judgment and action without exhaustive analysis. Heuristic thinking is fast, automatic, and intuitive. It's the kind of thinking that happens before you even realize you're thinking. This system works really well in situations where decisions need to be immediate, or information is limited, or, survival matters more than accuracy. And that's what is important about this. So, heuristic thinking is not stupid. It's not a flaw. It's not a moral failure. It's actually one of the reasons humans have survived as long as we have. So, heuristic thinking evolved for speed, not precision. If you hear a loud noise behind you, for example, you don't stop to analytically evaluate the probability that it's a threat. You move first and think later. If something looks dangerous or unfamiliar or emotionally charged, your brain will make a snap judgment. In those contexts, being roughly right and fast is better than being perfectly right and too late. So, heuristics are very good for everyday decisions, social navigation, pattern recognition, emotional awareness, and situations where speed matters. They also help conserve mental energy and reduce cognitive load on your brain. If we had to analytically think through every single decision we make in a day, we would be exhausted by noon. But, and this part's critical, heuristics are not designed to handle complex, abstract, emotionally loaded environments, especially modern social and political issues. The world we live in now increasingly requires analytical thinking to navigate complex information environments, constant media exposure, and nonstop propaganda campaigns. More and more people are using heuristics to make fast judgment calls on issues that actually require slow analytical evaluation. And that is where people can become really vulnerable to misinformation, propaganda, narrative control, subversion tactics, and psychological operations like we've been talking about. That's why I thought it was really important to bring up this topic about what heuristic thinking and what analytical thinking is, because I feel like it's a good toolbox for us. Heuristic thinking relies on things like familiarity, authority, emotional resonance, group identity, past experiences, and it asks questions like, does this sound like something I've heard before? Do people I trust believe this? How does this make me feel? Does this fit my existing worldview? What it doesn't ask is this true? What evidence supports this? What information might be missing? What would disprove this? And this is where problems arise. When heuristic thinking is applied to politics or media narratives or moral judgments or highly charged social issues, it becomes extremely vulnerable to manipulation. Not because people are dumb, but because the system is doing exactly what it was designed to do. Heuristic thinking prioritizes coherence over accuracy. It wants the story to make sense. It wants emotional clarity. It wants a clean narrow with heroes and villains because that's comforting. But comfort is not the same thing as truth. When people rely only on heuristic thinking, a few predictable things will happen. First, emotional reactions harden into beliefs. If something makes you angry or scared or morally outraged, your brain treats that emotion as evidence. The stronger the feeling, the more true the belief feels. Second, confirmation bias will kick in automatically. You stop actively looking for information because information that confirms your bias will start coming to you, and your brain will instantly sort it into this supports what I already believe, or this can't be trusted. Contradictory information isn't evaluated, it's dismissed. And third, authority and repetition will replace verification. So when claims are repeated often enough or come from sources your brain is already labeled as trusted, they bypass scrutiny. The brain says, we've seen this before, this is familiar, this is safe. And that familiarity feels like truth. Familiarity itself is actually a type of heuristic. So let's take a break from our boards and look up heuristics. Okay, so types of heuristics with examples. So first one is availability heuristics. So the quick definition is making decisions based upon information that is easily available. Hey guys, so it's that time where I need to ask you to subscribe to the channel. And if you're already subscribed, just hit the like, please. If you don't do this, I will be abducted by aliens. Thanks. We often rely upon and place greater emphasis upon information that is easily available when making decisions. This bias is one reason why political parties try to be the last person who talks to a voter before they go into a polling booth. The newness of the information may cause someone to vote for that part because the party's arguments are the closest to the top of mind. 2, representativeness heuristics. Making judgments based upon the similarity of one thing to its archetype. In social situations, this leads to prejudice. Affect heuristic. We often make decisions based on emotions, moods, and gut feelings rather than logic. Emotions, moods, and feelings impact our thoughts. This simple fact can lead people into making emotional decisions that they may regret later when they reflect using logic. Anchoring heuristic. We often make decisions based upon a subjective anchoring point that influences all subsequent thinking on a topic. An anchoring point is often the original piece of information that we are given. Based upon this original piece of information, all future thinking and decisions look either good or bad. Basic rate heuristic. We neglect the base statistics in favor of other more proximate statistics when making a judgment. Absurdity heuristic. We tend to classify things that are improbably as absurd rather than giving them proper consideration. I think that's supposed to say improbable. I don't know why it says improbably. Contagion heuristic. We can sometimes see people, ideas, and things as being either positively or negatively contagious despite lack of logic. Effort heuristic. Assuming the quality of something correlates with the amount of effort put into it. Familiarity heuristic. We can often take mental shortcuts when we decide things that are most familiar to us are better than things that are less familiar. Fluency heuristic. If an idea is communicated more fluently or skillfully, then it is given more credence than an idea that is clumsily communicated, regardless of the merit of the idea. Gaze heuristic. So animals and humans have developed the ability to fixate on an estimated position rather than conducting complex calculations. Generally, this is in relation to motion. Recognition heuristics. We assume that things we recognize have more value than things we don't recognize. Scarcity. When something is scarce, we see it as more valuable. Similarity. Similarity between past and present situations impacts decision-making, allowing people to bypass making objective comparisons of two alternatives. 15. Simulation heuristic. We tend to overestimate the likelihood of an event based on how easy it is to visualize. Social proof. We use social proof as a mental shortcut to verify the quality or veracity of something instead of investigating it ourselves. Oh, that one's really good. So this one's called social proof. I'm going to read it again. We use social proof as a mental shortcut to verify the quality or veracity of something instead of investigating it ourselves. I feel like that one's super important for us. The social proof heuristic occurs both in social norms and product marketing. In social norms, people tend to accept something as normal, correct, or appropriate because the rest of society does. Well, I think it's like also we watch people's podcasts or whatever, and we develop a trust and a sort of a parasocial relationship with them, and then we just think that they are right about everything. Authority heuristic. We tend to defer to authorities as a shortcut rather than doing the thinking and research ourselves. Ooh, that one's really important too. Yeah. So society is structured in such a way that we defer to authorities and experts constantly. Ugh. Hot hand fallacy. We overestimate our chances of success after a string of recent successes. Occam's razor. The assumption that the most straightforward explanation is the most accurate. So Occam's razor is actually a heuristic. That's interesting. Occam's razor refers to the preferencing of more straightforward explanations as opposed to more complex one. One logical justification for this is that the straightforward explanation has the least possible variables where mistakes in logic can occur. However, critics of this approach highlight that by definition, Occam's razor fails to contemplate all possible variables and therefore causes oversimplification of explanations. An oversimplification fallacy, that's a fallacy. So that's interesting. I never even thought about that. Nevertheless, invoking Occam's razor allows people to step back from a situation and contemplate whether they have overcomplicated a simple situation. So this one works both ways. That's interesting. Naive diversification. Longer-term planning tends to involve more diversification than shorter-term planning. Peak end rule. People tend to remember and pass judgment on an event based upon its most intense moment of finality rather than the average. Peak end rule refers to situations where the peak and the end of a situation are the most important in our memories. When describing situations in the past tense, our minds shortcut to the peak and the end and fail to contemplate the other parts of the memory. That's interesting. Mere exposure effect. The mere exposure effect occurs when people develop a preference for a stimulus, such as a brand, simply because it is familiar. It is sometimes referred to as the familiarity principle. The more frequently a person sees, experiences, or is otherwise exposed to something, the more likely it is that they will begin to like and favor it. This is a cognitive heuristic because it involves a mental shortcut where something that is familiar is assumed to be safer and more trustworthy than unfamiliar things, regardless of the facts of the case. So we did that. Okay, so what ends up happening is that labels your brain is created start doing the thinking for you. So the heuristics are labels the brain creates. Once an issue is packaged into a phrase, a slogan, or a moral category, your brain fills in the rest automatically without needing any other details. At that point, you're no longer analyzing information, you're reacting to a narrative. This is why propaganda doesn't need to convince people with facts. It just needs to activate the right heuristics. And this is reminding me of the whole Candace situation. If you know, you know. If it can trigger fear, anger, moral certainty, or tribal loyalty, persuasion isn't necessary because your brain will just run the process on autopilot. And here's the really uncomfortable part about all this. When people rely exclusively on heuristic thinking, they become predictable. And if you become predictable, you can be used, you can be manipulated, you can be put into things that are beyond your control, that you don't understand what strings are being pulled and by who. And you become not informed, not independent, predictable. Your reactions can be anticipated, guided, and exploited, not through force, but through framing. And that's why all this matters. That's why we need to know these things. Because the issue isn't that people have strong opinions. The issue is that those opinions were never actually thought through. And maybe they're not even actually your opinions. So they were felt, then they were reinforced, and then they were defended. And once an emotion hardens into an identity, questioning it feels like a threat. And that's why people get so upset. So heuristic thinking is powerful, it's useful, it's necessary, even. But on its own, without analytical thinking to slow it down, check it, and challenge it, it becomes a liability. And not with everything. You don't have to do this with everything, just like really important stuff. Things that you could be getting manipulated by. And especially when it comes to ideology, politics, all the stuff we see on social media, anything that's pulling at your emotions. Yeah. And that's where we're going to go next, is analytics. So if heuristic thinking is fast, right? It's fast, it's intuitive and automatic, then analytical thinking is almost the exact opposite. Analytical thinking is slow, it's deliberate, it takes effort. It's the kind of thinking that happens after your first reaction. So if heuristic thinking is fast, intuitive, and automatic, analytical thinking is slow, deliberate, effortful. Where heuristic thinking says, I already know what this means, analytical thinking says, maybe I don't. Instead of relying only on intuition or emotional reactions, analytical thinking relies on evidence, logic, context, probability, and uncertainty. It doesn't just ask what feels true, it asks what can actually be supported. And here's what is important to understand about that. Analytical thinking is not natural in the way heuristic thinking is. It's not automatic and it can feel uncomfortable and even frustrating at times. This is because analytical thinking requires you to have to slow down. It forces you to deal with uncertainty, and it requires you to admit your first impression might be wrong. Most people want to avoid it though because it's psychologically uncomfortable. Heuristic thinking, it gives you instant clarity, but analytical thinking leaves you with more questions. And many people will avoid analytical thinking because it's uncomfortable, or they also think they're not capable of doing it, which is untrue. Heuristics gives you instant gratification because you feel like you have clarity, where analytical thinking leaves you with more complexity and more questions. Complexity and more questions are not emotionally satisfying, but it gets you closer to actual reality. So, what is analytical thinking good for exactly? Analytical thinking is useful in situations where the stakes are high, information is complex, the consequences are long term, and emotional reactions are unreliable. It's the kind of thinking used in scientific research, legal reasoning, investigative journalist, intelligence analysis, medical diagnosis, and serious decisions. In these fields, being fast is not the goal, being accurate is. When dealing with topics like politics and social conflict, or media narratives, or moral controversies, and emotionally charged public events, analytical thinking becomes essential because these are exactly the kind of situations where relying only on heuristics makes people easiest to manipulate. Our brains naturally want to simplify complex, divisive, and emotionally loaded issues into good versus evil, or victim versus villain, or us versus them. Analytical thinking resists that simplification. It asks, what are the competing explanations? What do we actually know versus what we assume? What evidence do we have? And how reliable is it? What information might be missing? Who benefits from this framing? And notice something about these questions too is that they don't produce instant certainty. Analytical thinking often requires holding multiple possibilities in your mind at the same time, just like I do all the time. Uh, like my thoughts on Tucker, for example. Analytical thinking is not about being neutral or detached. It's about separating your emotions from your conclusions. It's about recognizing that feeling strongly about something does not automatically make your interpretation correct. You can feel outrage and still ask questions. You can feel empathy and still demand evidence. You can feel anger and still resist simplistic narratives. That's the discipline of analytical thinking. And I have an article on heuristic thinking versus analytical thinking that we can look at right now. Okay, so I couldn't find the actual article I was looking for, so I just went with this one. Heuristics arise from automatic system one thinking, which refers to the fast, automatic thinking that requires little effort. However, it is a common misconception that errors in judgment can be avoided by relying exclusively on system two thinking, the slower, more deliberate system involved in complex decision making. So, system one is the fast heuristic thinking that's sort of automatic, and system two in this article is the more slower, deliberate, analytical thinking. As pointed out by Kahneman, neither system two nor system one are infallible. While system one can result in relying on heuristics leading to certain biases, system two can give rise to other biases, such as confirmation bias. Systems 1 and 2 complement each other, and using them together can lead to more rational decision making. That is, we shouldn't make judgments automatically without a second thought, but we shouldn't overthink things to the point where we're looking for specific evidence to support our stance. Thus, heuristics can be avoided by making judgments more effortlessly, but in doing so, we must actively seek diverse information and evidence instead of relying solely on information that is easily accessible and available. I feel like we all could work on that, right? So, equally valuable is understanding the conditions under which heuristics will likely take over our thinking and make us prone to bias. For example, we often default to heuristics when our brains are under significant mental load, like when we're facing complex decisions or confusing information. Heuristics essentially preserve our brain's limited computational resources. This is why we're more likely to switch to system 1 thinking when we're feeling tired or stressed out or rushed, which is basically, all of us all the time in this crazy world. But um by recognizing these conditions, you can better spot times when you might be tempted to rely on mental shortcuts or reduce cognitive effort. If you find yourself using heuristics to make decisions or judgments with important consequences, consider taking a break and coming back to the problem at a later time. In other words, sleeping on it can actually help you make better decisions. And so I sort of do that all the time, which you guys will see when we go over my analytical exercise. But I will often just think about a problem, and thinking for everybody is different too. So like I don't actually really have narrative in my brain, so that's also kind of weird, but we won't get into all that. But thinking is different for everybody. But so for me, I'll be thinking about something I saw or something I found odd or whatever, and I'll think about it for like off and on throughout the day, thinking like what could it be if, what about this, what about that, or whatever, just pondering things. And then like I'll just leave it for a while and won't think about it. And then I'll come back to it and be like, "Oh yeah, I should like look up some stuff about that or about what I was thinking about that." And so like the whole process of like coming to a conclusion about something can take like quite a lot of time for me. Anyway, and then I'll also change it a lot with when if I get new information. Okay, I think that's good enough for that article. And here's why analytical thinking is essential for certain topics and issues. The more emotionally charged an issue is, the more likely heuristics will distort it. The more politically useful an issue is, the more aggressively narratives will be engineered around it. In those environments, analytical thinking is not just helpful, it's protective. It protects you from being emotionally hijacked. It protects you from being manipulated by framing. It protects you from outsourcing your thinking to institutions or influencers or tribes. So, if heuristic thinking makes you easier to steer, analytical thinking will make it harder for you to be controlled. It helps you become more discerning, right? Heuristics are important for survival. Analytical thinking is important for understanding reality. So, heuristics is survival basics every day. And then analytical thinking is what you do to understand the reality of situations, the world, ideas. You can use if this, then that questioning is can be really helpful. So in this next section, we're going to stop talking about this in theory and we're actually going to put it into practice. We're going to model an analytical thinking, what analytical thinking actually looks like in practice, not by arguing about facts, but examining the process of how conclusions can be formed. And we're going to use my way of doing it. Everybody's could be different. Everybody could come out with a different outcome. And I want everybody to remember that I am right wing. Sometimes people say I'm far right. Sometimes people say I'm conservative. Sometimes people say I'm a libertarian, so I'm not just like one thing, but just to remind everyone that that's where I'm coming from. So as we go through that exercise, my thought process could be different than other people's. And even people on the right are so diverse with their thinking. But this is what we're going to do. Okay. So, like, once you see how the process works, it should be much harder to be unconsciously pulled into narratives that you never chose in the first place, right? Okay, so here is how I broke down my thinking on the ICE situation, the ICE outrage situation. And to actually do the breakdown of the ICE situation, and this was crazy. I had to like think about how all this like unfolded for me and to remember what I saw first and stuff like that. So to actually go through it properly, we need to go back in time a little bit, back to when Trump first got elected and things were relatively calm with the far leftists and the media. And so many of us thought, I even remember people talking about this at the time, saying, oh, okay, maybe they will like be chill this time and won't completely freak out because they lost an election, like they've done literally ever since Lincoln became president. But then that CR bill came up, right? The CR bill, and CR means continuing resolution. So basically everything they'd all already agreed upon to keep the lights on until a new spending bill is set. So like weeks later, then they work out everything for the new budget or whatever. So that came out, and then the Senate threw a fit, remember? And they shut down the government because he had to have some of their votes to pass it. And then the usual social media agitators and even the media went straight to work creating this huge outrage, and it was like being blamed on Trump even though he has literally nothing to do with it, and the Republicans. So and then it moved from outrage to outrage after that, remember? So they were all upset about that. Everyone was losing their health care, everyone was getting their health care tripled or whatever. And then they started going in on that ballroom nonsense. So it was like one thing after the other, and it's like fake outrage. Like nobody cares about that. You know what I mean? So these things are happening, and my pattern recognition comes in. Now, being able to recognize patterns is actually a heuristic. So I have noticed that every time the Democrats lose an election, especially federally, they will do this type of stuff. They will shut down the government, then they get their people out like making a big stink, right? And that's sort of why when the Republicans do get in power, they don't do anything, because and I don't think it's the only reason, but I think that the reason why we get frustrated with them that they don't do anything is because they have been trained almost like for decades now that if they do anything, the Democrats will freak out. So it's almost like this like self-fulfilling loop that we're all in. Look, I'm going to be real honest with you guys. If I can't get people to subscribe or like, YouTube will literally send aliens to my house. Do you want me to be probed? I need you to like and to subscribe. Thank you. Okay, so then my pattern recognition picked up and I started being like, okay. Then moving forward, then the Somali fraud stuff started coming out. And it's beyond upsetting. And then, and it's even the governor, Tim Walz, is reportedly going to be resigning or whatever. But I think that, and so I'm thinking like, okay, this has to go deeper, like into the government, even maybe, but that's again heuristics, right? So then I start looking into it more, and out, I find out they were actually taking millions and millions of dollars in cash in suitcases through the airports for years. And I guess TSA was reporting it, but nobody did anything. So then I thought, okay, that is really weird. And this is still all heuristics, right? I'm taking the information in as I see it, and it makes me feel a certain way, but I'm lacking data. I need to learn more, right? So I asked myself, why are there all these Somalis in Minnesota anyway? Like, why, right? And so then I go look that up. And so I find out that the US started bringing them here in the 90s after the 1991 Civil War that started there. And hundreds of thousands of Somalis fled to camps in Kenya and Ethiopia. So I looked up the law, like what authority was there, right? And there's this Refugee Act of 1980, and that's what was used to bring them over here. And then they were handed off to what's called voluntary agencies, groups like the Lutheran Social Services, the Catholic Charities, and World Relief. They chose Minnesota because its history with refugees since the Vietnam War. So they've been a welcome, like they've been a place where refugees go. They have a robust social service network and a welcoming reputation. By the end of the 90s, that community grew from 1,200 to 6,000. Now, I want to pause here and kind of tell you what I'm thinking as I'm learning all this stuff. First, I don't like this. I'm sorry if that offends anyone, but I don't like this. Why does the government and these charity organizations who are probably making money somehow, and we're going to see that later, why do they get to bring people into your community or my community without asking you? I feel like people should have a say or a vote maybe. And that's one of the things people are getting really outraged by because like, especially even overseas, all these people are getting brought in. In England, over 1 million people a year have been getting brought in for decades, and nobody asks these people that actually live there. Nobody asks the English people if this was cool. The politicians are just doing this stuff. I don't like that. I don't feel like they should just be allowed to do that. And whoever it was in the 80s who voted this act in, well, I wasn't even born then. So and so I just think some of the stuff needs to be reviewed, okay? Because things are a lot different now than they were in the 80s. But then, okay, so then I think, okay, but this was the 90s. Things were different. People used to assimilate better before all the woke stuff. Like, people used to come here and love the country and want to be an American. But that's not how it is anymore because of this woke stuff. It's pretty much all over the world, the Marxism and the socialism. So, even after they come here, they probably already have the virus, let's just say, and then they come here, and then the people who are helping them and communicating with them and doing things also have the virus, and they're taught to hate Americans and take advantage of us and stuff. But then I think, so the people that came here in the 90s, it was probably different, they're probably like fine or whatever. But then I think of that Ilhan Omar. So I'm thinking, oh, okay, like they're probably fine. That came in the 90s. And then I go, oh, but then there's that Ilhan Omar and how hateful she is towards our country and how much she hates us and all this stuff. And so then I get upset again. And so I know, like, imagine being me. This is how this is how I figure things out all the time. And how I am. And I don't do all this at once. This is like a process over many days and stuff. So, anyway, I found out that we brought in 150,000 Somalis total, and 100,000 of them are in Minnesota alone. Um, there's more now, but we brought in 150,000, and then 100,000 just ended up in Minnesota, which is the largest Somali population. And then the second largest is somewhere in Georgia, I think, that has 50,000. And then there's no, not Georgia. Georgia had like 15,000. Columbus, Ohio has 50,000. Okay, so I'm thinking, all right, they can't, 100,000, they can't all like be wrapped up in this fraud, right? I mean, that would be silly to think. So then I start looking into that more. And then that's when I find out that there's like other frauds way more frauds than we've ever even heard of. Like there's this, I found this feeding our future fraud, and it's like a $250 million scandal that I didn't even know about. Okay. So then I think, how can the state pay all this money? Because now we've got this and all these other ones we're finding out about. And I'm thinking, how could the state pay out all this money and not know? So, like, they have to be in on it, right? I mean, so I'm thinking, like, what on earth? But that's also a heuristic because I don't have any evidence for that, right? But then I go looking some more and I find out that the state did get suspicious of the program because the number of meals being claimed was impossible. Like one site claimed to be feeding 6,000 kids in a town of only 2,000 people. So when this, this is crazy. So when the state tried to stop payments, the Somali organization sued them for discrimination, and a judge actually held the state in contempt and forced them to pay the $47,000 in legal fees and to keep paying them all this stuff, right? That they were for the sites, even though they weren't feeding anybody. This created like a chilling effect with the government, and officials were terrified of the optics because the media made them look like they were starving immigrant children. So they just kept paying it. And so between 2020 and the FBI raid in like 2022, I think it is, or 2023, another 150 to $2 million was paid out. And this lady named Amy Bach, who's like white, actually coached these, she partnered with these Somali partners. They called it her Somali partners to use fake claims of racism. So she coaches them to use fake claims of racism as a weapon to silence state auditors. And that's probably why all this other fraud was allowed to go on too, because everybody was afraid of being called racist. And there was I even heard people talking out now, like hearings and stuff, saying they were being coerced not to say anything. And if they did, they'd get, retribution and stuff, right? So it created a climate of this sort of behavior. And that's probably why all this other fraud was allowed to go on to the tune of billions and billions and billions of dollars. And so maybe, government officials might be in on it some way. There were bribes and stuff mentioned, and but we don't need to go that deep. Okay, so now I'm like, okay, this is clearly really bad. We can't even bring people here anymore, in my opinion, because we have all these white liberals that teach them to hate us and teach them to steal. And then if it gets called out, they teach them to use racism and stuff as a weapon against us. And I think about the notes that I made in the side of my head about Minnesota being friendly and welcoming. And then these people do this to them because they have this culture there in Minnesota, are like Norwegian bloodlines and stuff, and they're super polite, high trust society. Okay, so now you have all these people coming into this high trust society, and then this is what happens. Okay, so then I'm like all upset, right? And then I think, okay, you know what? I don't live in Minnesota. So if they want their taxes to rise, and then by all this happening, their, rents go up, literally everything goes up, insurances, uh, everything. I'm like, fine, whatever. If that's what they want to do, whatever, right? But then I remembered that the feds were involved. So then I asked myself, okay, how much of this money was federal money? Well, guess what? 100%, 100% of all this fraudulent money is federal money, meaning everybody's paying for it, not just the state of Minnesota. Everyone's on the hook for this because it's federal. The state was just a middleman for the United States Department of Agriculture. So all that cash came from the federal child and adult care program and like the summer feeding program of the federal government. And the fact that the program jumped from 3.4 million in 2019 to 200 million in 2021 is what tipped off the feds. So state, the actual state government just kept giving out these checks and didn't think that the federal government would notice that 3.4 million jumped up to 200 million dollars in just like a couple years. Okay. So, where did all that money go? I wondered, right? So the FBI and the IRS, it's actually really frustrating. Like, this story makes me so upset. Like, I was really upset for a good while. So the FBI and the IRS tracked it to luxury real estate in Kenya and Turkey. So they were buying luxury properties in Kenya and Turkey and other places like that. Teslas, Porsches, and even commercial laundromats for laundering the money. Some estimates say that the total fraud across all these programs could be between 9 and 19 billion dollars just for the state of Minnesota. Because there's like 14 high risk programs that they're trying to go through all the books to see how much of it is fraud. Okay, so I'm like, wow, this is really, really bad. This is bad. This is embarrassing. Then I see that Tim Waltz guy come out and say that calling out the fraud or looking into the fraud is racist. So I'm like, okay, that's it. I've seen enough. I don't care anymore. Here is where I land. And some people might not like this or find this offensive, but this is just being logical and rational. And I'm very much like that. So you just have to take that with a grain of salt. None of us asked for this. When you bring large people groups like this, like just large amounts of people into one area like that, it strains local resources and puts them on welfare programs that cost all of us. We bring people here out of the goodness of our hearts. They disdain us. So this is an if then. Okay. Not all of them, but we just got taken for $19 billion that we know of in one state. Okay. All right. So we're using generalizations here. Okay. When we bring people here out of the goodness of our hearts, they disdain us and they steal billions of dollars from us. We are Americans, for goodness sakes. This is disgusting. We cannot just roll over and take this. And if we continue to do this, our entire country will be destroyed and we will be living in a third world country. So, in my view, every single Somali on welfare needs to be remigrated back to their country. Okay? I don't care. I don't care. If any of them have no criminal background record, has not had a single thing, no DUI, nothing since the whole time they've been here, if it's been more than 10 years or something, there needs to be a logistical plan. And then they all need to be remigrated, the ones that fall into the plan that we logistically make. That makes logic sense. Okay, so people might not like that, but that's logic. The state of Minnesota clearly cannot handle having a large refugee or immigrant population. All you have to do is shame these people a little bit by calling them a racist, and they'll let you do anything. They'll let you steal $19 billion. This behavior cannot be allowed. So clearly they can't have populations like this sent there anymore. We shouldn't be bringing populations into the country like this, but in large amounts and putting them in one place. But if that does happen, they can't go to Minnesota. Okay, clearly Minnesota is not able to deal with this type of thing properly. Whoever is left after deporting everyone, if it's large numbers, they need to be split up into very small numbers and put into other communities. I don't care. Minnesota cannot deal with this. Minnesota, they can't deal with this. So Somali immigration needs to be completely banned. That is the conclusion I've reached after following the thread, okay, and looking at all this surrounding this. So that's that. Whatever. I make no decisions, so nobody should really care what I think anyway. Okay. Now, after I'm trying to wrap my head around all that, this whole ICE outrage situation blows up in Minneapolis. So let's break this down very simple. So, first thing that actually comes to my mind is that leftist politicians there want to enrage the radical left to cause all this scene to distract from the fraud. That's was the first thing I thought of because I had the fraud thing on my mind. Also, I think, what is wrong with these people? They're fine with just people stealing from us and having criminals there. Seriously, what is going on? But again, all this is just heuristic thinking. So I keep pondering. And so I think, okay, well, what even is ICE? I mean, I know it has to do with immigration, but actually don't know a lot about it. So, what is ICE? Okay, so it stands for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It's a federal agency under the Department of Homeland Security, the DHS, responsible for enforcing immigration laws inside the United States, investigating criminal activities related to immigration, such as human trafficking, immigration fraud, or visa violations. So, investigating criminal activities related to immigration, such as human trafficking. I feel like that might be important to have somebody doing, you know? Detaining and deporting individuals who are in the U.S. unlawfully. Investigating custom violations, including smuggling and trade fraud. Okay, ICE has two main divisions, I learned: enforcement and removal operations. So, the enforcement and removal operations handles locating, detaining, and deporting people who violate immigration laws. Homeland Security investigations is the second division, and it investigates criminal networks, including immigration fraud, human trafficking, cybercrime, and smuggling. All important stuff. Okay, so I'm thinking this is all good. We need this type of thing, right? I say, okay. So like where does ICE get its authority from? So, ICE is a federal agency that was created in 2003 under the Homeland Security Act, which reorganized many agencies after 9/11. So, what that means is there were probably other agencies doing things, but then there was a reorganization that split things up, sort of like they did with the CIA and all that stuff throughout time. Its authority comes from federal law. Okay, so it gets its authority from federal law, including the Immigration Nationality Act, which gives ICE the power to enforce immigration laws, arrest undocumented immigrants, detain them, and initiate removal proceedings. So, initiate deportation proceedings. Homeland Security Act of 2022-2023 established ICE within the Department of Homeland Security and assigned it responsibilities for immigration enforcement and investigations of customs violations. Federal criminal statutes, including fraud, human trafficking, smuggling laws, which ICE can investigate under Homeland Security investigations. Okay, so then I think, where does the federal government get its authority to create these laws? The Constitution gives the federal government the primary authority over immigration and borders, mainly in these areas. Congress has the power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. This is the core authority to define who can enter, stay, and become a citizen. Federal immigration law overrides conflicting state or local laws. States cannot create their own immigration rules or control who enters the country. So it's got a supremacy clause in there. So Article 1, Section 8. Okay? And this is pretty important because a lot of us were upset back in the day when the governors weren't doing more. We're like, well, if the federal government's not going to do it because Biden was letting in all those people, the governors just should. And they probably still can't because the states are who gave the authority to the federal government. So they should, in theory, be able to take it back. But apparently it seems like it's probably more complicated than that. So this is really interesting, right? So states cannot create their own immigration rules or control who enters the country. So, in short, immigration is a federal, not state responsibility. Okay, so then I think, okay, well, Donald Trump won the Electoral College in a landslide and the popular vote on at least one platform of dealing with illegal immigration and securing the border. And keep in mind that Biden opened the borders and let millions and millions of people in. So that would mean not only is it literally the job of the federal government to remove illegals, but Trump also has a mandate from the people. That's what it's called when you overwhelmingly win in an election in a landslide and you get the popular vote. That's called a mandate. Okay, so that means what your platform was, the majority of people were into, and the majority of states. Okay, and so it was awfully strange to me that you have people out here saying that ICE deporting people is somehow unlawful, unconstitutional, like really freaking out and saying like some really bizarre stuff. Like if you believe in the rules and laws of your country, that you're like a bootlicker and a Nazi and a fascist and all this crazy stuff. And I'm just thinking, I, I, I want illegals deported from my country. We have laws, we have borders. This is the agency that's used to do that. I'm confused. I don't know. Is everybody stupid? Has everyone lost their mind? What are you talking about, right? So, so not only that, though, not only are people saying this really weird stuff, but not only that, but they're actively, the ones on the ground there are actively interfering with federal law enforcement, which I was pretty sure was illegal. So I looked that up. Okay. So obstruction of federal officers, 18 USC 111, assaulting, resisting, or impeding federal officers. It is a federal crime to forcibly assault, resist, oppose, impede, intimidate, or interfere with any federal officer or employee while they are performing their official duties. Penalties is a misdemeanor up to a year in prison, or it can even be a felony up to 8 years in prison. So if there's any weapons or if there's any injury involved, like if anybody gets hurt, it is up to a felony with maximum 8 years in prison. Number two, obstruction of federal process, 18 USC 1501. Obstructing or resisting federal officers executing legal process such as warrants, subpoenas, and arrest is a misdemeanor up to a year in prison and fines possibly. Now, this one's really important. So, conspiracy to obstruct the U.S. government, what it covers: two or more people conspiring to obstruct lawful federal functions, up to 5 years in federal prison, fines, or both. Okay, and that's a felony. Now, they are doing that type of stuff. People are planning, they're making manuals, they're tracking ICE, they're following them around, they're impeding them purposefully, they're doing all this stuff. That is conspiracy to obstruct. Completely illegal. Harboring or shielding unauthorized immigrants. Knowingly harboring, concealing, transporting, or shielding undocumented immigrants. Up to 5 years in prison per person helped. If done for profit or commercial advantage, up to 10 years for prison. If serious injury or death occurs, up to 20 years in life. Okay, so that's that. So then I think to myself, okay, they are also rioting. These aren't protests. And yes, there are probably many people there who are lawfully protesting, not doing anything, but the majority of what is going on there is technically rioting. When you protest, you do so in an orderly manner. And that's that's the rights you have under the Constitution, is in an orderly manner that doesn't like mess with other people's lives. Going into a neighborhood and blowing a whistle 24/7 and obstructing traffic and causing the people there lives to not be able to live properly is is not protected under the Constitution, because now you're violating those people's rights. And there's like ordinances in every city and stuff like that, because you can't just do that. You can't just disturb the peace of people. That's not allowed. Okay? So the majority of what's going on there is rioting. There is actually federal law regarding this. And let me just show you really quick. Okay, so in this video here, these people, like, they're technically, like, they're not being violent, these people walking, but they're obstructing people driving, and this guy's getting angry, and he's saying, like, I live over here, I want to go over here, and he wasn't the only one. There were, like, several people who live in this neighborhood, and when you do stuff like this, like, who are these people? These people do not have authority over you. These people, when you do stuff like this where you're shutting down streets, you have to get permits and stuff, and it has to be all set out and orderly, and it's like, oh, we're only going to be, here, and then you tell people, and like, people know you don't just disturb their day. This goes on and on forever. People can't, this guy's just like a hardworking man. Okay, he's very frustrated. Here's people breaking into a hotel, and the workers are trying to hold them off, and they're breaking windows and attacking these workers of this hotel because they think ice might be in there. How none of these people should normally, if I don't know what is going on, they should be arrested, because there's all these laws they can use against them that carry harsh penalties. So they're smashing businesses' windows and stuff. Here's something retelling people that ICE doesn't have the right to arrest you. Yes, they do. Okay, so that was just, I didn't want to like spend a lot of time on that. I just wanted to show that there actually like is rioting going on there. And you see it constantly all over social media and stuff. Okay, so there's actually a federal law regarding this. It's called Civil Disorder Riot, 18 USC 231. Inciting, organizing, or participating in a riot that obstructs federal law enforcement or interstate commerce. So that's up to 5 years in federal prison, fines, or both. If violence occurs, additional charges apply, like assault, arson, weapons, property damage, you know? So, what is the difference between a riot and a constitutionally allowed peaceful protest? I think to myself. Well, the Constitution protects peaceful protests, but it does not protect everything people call a protest. There's a legal line between speech and obstruction, between dissent and coercion. Once you see that line, the narrative around these events will start to look very different. What is a peaceful protest? Under the U.S. constitutional law, the right to protest comes from the First Amendment, which protects freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom to petition the government. But those rights are not unlimited. A protest is considered peaceful if participants express views through speech, signs, limited chanting, or assembly, do not use violence, do not damage property, do not physically obstruct people or law enforcement, do not engage in criminal acts. And by limited chanting, it means, say you're walking, say you're a group and you're walking by and you're chanting. Well, you're chanting for like 5 minutes maybe outside people's residence or where they work. You know what I mean? Like as you're walking by. Or if you're on a sidewalk that's just businesses around, you're not bothering residential people, which have different laws. But if you are just constantly just staying in one area and just blowing your whistle over and over and over again, that's different. Do you see what I mean? So in other words, a peaceful protest is an expressive activity that does not involve violence, force, or unlawful interference with others. You can't just interfere with other people. Okay? So, Key Supreme Court principles. Speech is protected, violence is not. The Supreme Court has repeatedly ruled peaceful expression is protected. Violence or threats are not protected under the First Amendment. So you can't just go around stopping cars and harassing and threatening people. That is coercion. That's illegal. Okay? That's harassment. That's illegal. The government can regulate the time, place, and manner. Even peaceful protests can be restricted if they block roads or buildings. Then you have to get permits and make plans with the city if you plan on blocking roads and stuff like that. Disrupt government operations. Okay, that's pretty important, I feel like. Violate permits or curfews. Trespass on property or restricted property. A protest can be nonviolent but still be illegal. Physical obstruction is not protected speech. Courts have ruled that physically blocking entrances or interfering with law enforcement, preventing arrests, or occupying buildings is not protected speech. Their conduct, not speech, and therefore they're not constitutionally protected. When does a protest become a riot? Under federal law, 18 U.S.C. 2102, a riot involves violence or threats of violence by a group, creating danger to people or property. Once violence occurs, the protest loses constitutional protection. The First Amendment protects speech, not conduct, that obstructs lawful functions. We can analytically break this down into three categories, okay? 1, peaceful and legal protests protected by the Constitution. 2, nonviolent but illegal protests. Example, blocking roads, occupying buildings, refusing to disperse, nonviolent but not constitutionally protected. Group 3, criminal activity, no constitutional protection. If people are constantly blowing whistles to disrupt others, stopping cars, blocking traffic, harassing individuals, intimidating people, these are generally classified as disorderly conduct. Most states and cities criminalize disorderly conduct and have laws against unreasonable noise, obstruction of traffic, harassment or intimidation, creating a public disturbance. Even without violence, this is illegal conduct. Okay? Unlawful assembly. A protest becomes an unlawful assembly when a group gathers with the intent to disrupt or obstruct lawful activity. So if your goal is to obstruct ICE from apprehending illegals, or to block them, or to slow them down, or to cause them grief and harm and ram them with your cars and etc., etc., then you are gathering with the intent to disrupt or obstruct lawful activity. Authorities order dispersal and the group refuses. That's unlawful assembly. If violence or threat occurs, it can escalate to a riot under state law or civil disorder under federal law. So obstruction of public ways, blocking cars or roads is typically illegal under state law, not protected speech, grounds for arrest. Courts have consistently ruled that the right to protest does not include the right to physically block others from freely moving. Why? Because in the Constitution, they have the right of freedom of travel. Okay? Harassment and intimidation. If conduct targets individuals with repeated unwanted contact, threats, aggressive behavior, it can be charged as harassment, intimidation, even sometimes stalking if it's persistent. This is also not protected by the First Amendment. Most public debate collapses these three categories into one, which is why narratives can become distorted around this topic. Heuristic thinking asks, or heuristic thinking says protest equals peaceful or protest equals riot, but analytical thinking says, what exactly did people do? What are the laws? Did they cross the line from speech to coercion or violence? Did they interfere with with lawful government functions? That's the real legal boundary. That's where what we need to be looking at. We have laws. What do the laws say? What are the people doing? What exactly is going on? The people doing all this are doing it purposefully too, and for a reason. One, they want to slow down and make it harder for ICE to deport people. So let's think about why that would be. Well, the Democrats wanted all these people in here in the first place, right? They brought them all in for a reason. They have all this planned out logistically. They brought them to specific areas that they then deemed sanctuary cities, not only for voting, but more importantly, to count as population numbers so they can redistrict those areas to pick up more seats in the House. It's all very calculated. So they don't even, yes, the votes, some of them will vote, but the main thing is that they wanted to use the body count to redistrict those areas, which is what they're doing now, so that they can re um, redefine the number of seats in their state so that there are less Republicans there, or so that Republicans can never win again, like they've done in other states where they get into power, they do these things so they get into power, and then they make laws and stuff so that they will never be out of power. And there's several states like that, and that's what they're doing in Virginia right now, unfortunately. So that's why they need them there. And so they want the process to be slowed down from removing them. Now, I want to pause here and pull up an article by Green Beret Naptime. He also has a YouTube channel and an X that I will link below. But he has an excellent Substack. Okay, so we're not going to read the whole article because I might be pretty long. But please go subscribe to his Substack that I'll leave a link to, along with his YouTube channel and Twitter, like I said. But it's called How NGOs Aided Illegal Immigration. So during President Biden's term, a vast network of non-governmental agencies and nonprofits played a significant role in assisting migrants entering and dispersing through the United States. Many of these organizations operated as part of an international support network that formed in 2019 and expanded during the Biden border crisis. But as we're going to see here, a lot of these agencies were the same ones that I saw that helped the Somali population be moved into Minneapolis and other places in Minnesota. So this UN and NGO partnership established aidway stations along key migration routes in South and Central America, effectively encouraging and facilitating mass illegal migration. According to congressional testimony, this network, involving 15 UN agencies and 240 plus NGOs, helped at least 10 million foreign nationals from 180 countries make the journey to the U.S. southern border during 2021 and 2024. These NGOs provided food, shelter, medical aid, and crucially, transportation guidance, essentially creating a safe pathway that enabled migrants to reach and cross the U.S. border. Once migrants arrived at the border, U.S. government capacity quickly became overwhelmed by the unprecedented influx. Border patrol facilities were overflowing, forcing authorities to catch and release many migrants into the interior. At this stage, NGOs became the critical last link in what some officials describe as a transnational human smuggling pipeline. Processed migrants were often handed off to charitable or religious nonprofits operating near border towns. For example, Catholic Charities of the Rio Grande Valley runs a respite center in McAllen, Texas, where released asylum seekers are received, cared for, and assisted with onward travel. These NGOs shelter, feed, and coordinate travel for migrants to their final destination across the U.S. Witnesses at a 2025 House hearing described how The goal of these NGOs was to get people to their desired destination within the United States and get them settled in. Even though most had no legal status yet, staff and volunteers would help migrants book planes or bus tickets, escort groups to airports, and sometimes even accompany unaccompanied minors on flights to ensure they reach the correct destination. Our investigative report found just 1 month, January 2022, around 30,000 migrant phones were tracked from NGO shelters in border states to 431 of 435 congressional districts, illustrating how intensively NGOs disperse newcomers nationwide. And these congressional districts, with my theory, my heuristics of I think they're moving them into these places so that they can, which they're doing now, the redistricting. Totally no agenda here, right? By providing these guaranteed help once migrants reach the U.S. soil, NGOs arguably created an added incentive for people to undertake the dangerous journey. Migrants learned that if they made it across, humanitarian groups would assist them in settling anywhere in America. Funding flows, taxpayer grants, and spending by key NGOs. Facilitating millions of migrants required enormous financial resources, and you guessed it, much of it ultimately derived from the U.S. taxpayer. The Biden administration channeled billions of dollars to these NGOs through agencies like the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Health and Human Services, and FEMA, and others. One analysis by the Center for Immigration Studies found the administration directed roughly $6 billion to a coalition of about 15 UN agencies and 230 NGOs to support migrants on their journey. This is on top of the hundreds of millions more spent on NGO partnerships to help resettle migrants after they arrive on US soil. And so remember when I said I bet these people are making money somehow? Yeah, our taxpayer money. In essence, federal funds reimbursed charities for acting as an outsourced refugee reception and transport program. And then it describes the Catholic Charities, the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, Church World Service, Endeavors, Southwest Key Programs, U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, and other groups. In total, well over $6 billion of U.S. taxpayer funds flowed to NGOs dealing with migrants during 2021 to 2024. Some of these came via FEMA's emergency programs. For instance, Congress approved $110 million in American Rescue Plan funds for border area nonprofits. A DHS Inspector General later found some of that money was misspent, even supporting migrants who evaded Border Patrol entirely. The lack of transparency and oversight on these grants have been a reoccurring concern. So this person that testified said it's almost impossible to track. The NGOs have taken over DHS's role. They help whoever they encounter, including gotaways with no CBP record, put them on planes and send them all around the country. The biggest issue is that it makes it hard to track the funds the government is giving these organizations. It's worth noting that many NGO leaders argue their motive is humanitarian, not political or profit. They highlight services provided, food, clothing, basic medical care, communications for migrants to contact family, which would otherwise fall to the government or result in people stranded on the streets. Now, this makes me think heuristically, why aren't these organizations lobbying the government for money to actually help Americans that are on the street and Americans that are homeless or Americans that are struggling to pay their bills and could possibly end up homeless soon? Couldn't this money help Americans? However, investigations have uncovered troubling failures in some federally funded programs. For example, Endeavors was found to have mismanaged a youth housing contract. Unvetted staff were hired, safety protocols lapsed, and thousands of children were released to sponsors without proper follow-up, resulting in 325,000 minors becoming unaccounted for after being delivered to sponsors under HHS and NGO care. Such outcomes led to a House subcommittee in 2025 to deem the NGO facilitated resettlement of unaccompanied children one of the greatest failures in American history in terms of child safety. No one has been held accountable for this either, as you can imagine. Now, there's financial links to PACs and political influence. So, a key question is whether these migrant assistant nonprofits have financial ties to political action committees or PACs or political causes. By law, 501c3 charities, like most NGOs above, cannot donate to candidates or PACs. Indeed, there is no evidence that organizations like Catholic Charities or LIRS directly contributed money to election campaigns, as their government funding is earmarked for services and they are barred from partisan spending. However, indirect and informal links do exist between this NGO network and U.S. political actors. So, lobbying and advocacy. Several NGOs ramped up lobbying efforts to secure funding and influence migration policy. For example, Southwest Key Programs spent about $160,000 on federal lobbying in 2024, likely to advocate for continued grants and favorable regulations. Catholic Charities USA also reported 280,000 in lobbying expenditures in 2024, often urging Congress for more humanitarian aid and asylum resources. While lobbying isn't a PAC contribution, it's a way these groups use funds to sway policy and budgets, essentially asking for taxpayer money to support migrants. Campaign contributions by affiliates. Although the nonprofits themselves don't donate to campaigns, individuals associated with them do. According to Open Secrets data, employees and officials listed Catholic Charities as their employer made around 140,000 in federal political contributions in the 2024 election cycle. The donations tend to favor Democrats, but also included some Republican committees. This suggests that the people running or working for these NGOs often support political candidates aligned with pro-immigration or humanitarian stances. Another example is Vera Institute, funded to defend immigrants in court, whose staff alumni have included prominent progressive activists and even Biden administration officials. The overlap of personnel indicates a shared ideological ecosystem between certain NGOs and the current administration's political appointees. Okay, so that's all we're going to read of that article in Substack um, by Green Beret Nap Time. Let us go back. Okay, so back to the rioters, the protesters, etc. So the second reason they do this is optics. They're trying to make ICE look bad. They're trying to change the public opinion on mass deportations. It's already working too. Public opinion has been swayed somewhat. It's a way to subvert the will of the American people, if that makes sense. The vast majority of American people wanted the borders secure and the illegal immigration, especially the huge influx brought in, to be dealt with. But then they make this big scene and make it look really bad. So then that changes public opinion, which then changes what the politicians will do because, you know, they always have elections coming up and such. They literally have manuals and signal threads to teach people how to cause these confrontations, hoping to catch hostile moments on camera. So let me show you some of that. Okay, so this guy infiltrated this signal network. So I've infiltrated, his name is Cam Higby at Cam, CAMHIGBY on Twitter. I have infiltrated organizational signal groups around Minneapolis with the sole intention of tracking down federal agents and impeding, assaulting, and obstructing them. Now, we just went over the laws. This is like breaking the law, right? So each area of the city has a signal or several signals. Let's start with a screen recording of all the members of the South Side group to start. And so these people coordinate together, conspire. It's a conspiracy to impede and slow down and cause problems for the ICE agents trying to carry out their lawful duties. Okay, and then here's another thing about operational manual posted in the Minnesota anti-ICE signal chat called for militants like Alex Preddy to create flashpoints with federal agents in the streets, per documents obtained by Cam Higby. Throw ICE off their course, waste their time, force them to drive away, alert at risk people to ICE presence, make the whole neighborhood aware of ICE presence to get them outside and resisting, escalate ICE abductions, and create potential flashpoints. This is all super illegal under federal law. We just went over the laws. Okay. So here's like how to observe ICE. So this tells them all that. Then what is a flashpoint? So this is in their manual. Flashpoints are specific times and places where a crisis quickly and dramatically escalates. When we say flashpoint, we mean any time and place where masses of people are directly confronting the armed force of the state. So there are several places across Twin Cities metro that already have or could in the future escalate into larger, more sustained confrontations. Another murder, a prolonged and escalated abduction attempt, fascist civilians escalating violently, or mass protests that spill out into an escalated confrontation with the state at all potential situations could lead to flashpoints. They just said they want to create flashpoints. Okay. And it lists murder. Like, so they want that stuff to happen so they can catch it on camera. Attack hotels where ICE agents are staying. Determine the goal. The goal is to stop an abduction. Is the goal to stop an abduction? De-arrest someone, which is illegal. You cannot do that. Create a blockade to prevent ops from coming and or going. Push back on the creation of a boundary or something else. Consider what it will take to accomplish the chosen goal and whether the rest of your present AG is on board with said goal. Is it achievable based on who is present? So they have manuals, they have signal chats that they're all planning and doing this stuff with, okay? So all these agitators are basically Marxists, which I have explained before is actually a huge problem that is going on in our country, and it is extremely dangerous, and it is no joke. And none of this is new. This is all a combination of color revolution tactics, Marxist revolution tactics like Mao used. And while we're speaking of Mao, this footage is really disturbing to me, and some people might not get the connection here.
Is this serious? I'm pulling my child today.
So I can't make there be sound on this, but just a viral video out of Washington. A mom yanked her kid from school after learning students were allowed to leave campus for an anti-ICE walkout that spilled out into the streets. So she's talking about she showed up there. She didn't know what was going on. They're honking, yelling. She didn't honk, so they start booing and screaming at her. She's immediately, then she sees they're yelling F ICE and all this stuff. She goes inside. She says, I'm withdrawing my child out of the school immediately, like taking them out of school, like completely, like unenrolling. Because she's like, I can't believe you're allowing the children to do this. This is extremely crazy. This is not proper. And it is true. Like, this is a school with taxpayer money, federal money, and they are allowing this to happen and probably encouraging it. And this is why it's dangerous. If you know history, which is why I stress so much that we have to understand history, because if we don't, we are so acceptable to not knowing what the heck is going on or what things could lead to. So, if you know the history of the Red Guard in China, yeah, so they're all like, "Oh, nothing's going, like, everybody's safe." And she's like, "No, they're not. What are you doing?" The principal comes, whatever. But let me find. Okay, so this the Red Guards were a mass student-led paramilitary social movement mobilized by Chairman Mao Zedong in 1966 until their abolition in 1968, during the first phase of the Cultural Revolution, which he had instituted. According to a Red Guard leader, the movement's aims were as follows. Chairman Mao has defined our future as an army of revolutionary youth organization. So if Chairman Mao is our Red Commander in Chief, we are his Red Guards. Who can stop us? First, we will make China Maoist from the inside out, and then we will help the working people of other countries and the world and make the world red, and then the whole universe. Okay, so what these were these were students that had been brainwashed basically their whole life into this really weird um Marxist communism. And then at some point a bunch of people starved to death, okay? And then other leaders in China forced Mao to admit that he was wrong, and they took like power away from him, which then made him have to try to get power back. He started this cultural revolution, and he started it with the students. So he got the students riled up that he knew were brainwashed into his ideology, and then they committed horrible crimes. So they were to destroy everything old, everything that was tradition of China. Okay, so they had to get rid of everything of that were symbols, destroying some symbols and traditions of Chinese pre-communist past, including ancient artifacts and grave sites of notable Chinese figures. Moreover, the government was very permissive of the Red Guards and even allowed Red Guards to inflict bodily harm on people viewed as dissidents. The movement quickly grew out of control, but before it did, they ended up killing like all their like tons of their teachers, brutally killing their teachers, their parents, and their grandparents. So let me go show you. I figured out the sound problem. My headphones weren't plugged in all the way. I don't know.
I believed everything. And so that is why by the time the Mao, and they are also
Okay, so this is Dad Saves America podcast, which I have recommended before, which is an amazing podcast. And let me make it full screen. And I will link this video below, but this woman, she wrote a book, and she was raised in China under Mao. And so she tells her story, but the pertinent story here is about the Red Guard, which I already knew. I already know a lot of this stuff because I'm really fascinated by ideologies and how they like came about, and I've traced it and stuff like that, like I've talked about. So I thought when I saw that kids, the videos, and that's not the only one, this is like happening all over. And that woman in the video, if when I don't know if you guys could hear her talking, I didn't play the whole thing, but she's talking about how the kids were booing her and screaming at her and stuff because she wasn't honking against ICE or whatever. And that reminded me of the Red Guard, because it didn't take much once the youth was brainwashed into the ideology. It didn't take much of a push to get them to turn against their parents, their teachers, other leaders of the community and stuff, anybody that they saw as against the ideology that they had been brainwashed up into. And so she tells the story about that.
taught that Mao is our real parent. Mao is our great leader, our savior, and our real parent. So you listen to him and you answer, and your greatest honor and duty is to defend Mao. Now Mao asks you to do one thing. Mao told us that we are in danger. China is in danger. Our educational system has been infiltrated by.
Okay, so what do we hear them telling the kids and the youth and all this stuff? They tell them that our democracy is in danger, right? You hear that a lot. And that we're all Nazis, that we're fascists, that the administration is fascist, and that they're against everyone, that ICE is, you know, horrible and doing bad stuff. This is Maoist cultural revolution tactics, Marxist. That's where Mao was a Marxist communist. Okay, he was an elite person that read all the books and stuff and got like swept up into it.
It's the bourgeois, by those capitalist rollers. The people want to take us back to capitalism. They are evil people. We have to get them out. That's it. That's it. Okay, but it's more than that. The story is fascinating. Okay,
Yeah.
there's no social media, right? There's hardly any ways of communication among the young people across a huge country. So what?
And so she wrote a book called Mao's America because she was raised in it. So she sees the same tactics being employed here, like I'm trying to explain as well. And this is dangerous. No, people do not understand how dangerous this is. There has been millions and millions and millions and millions, hundreds of millions of people killed from the time that all these philosophies and ideologies got put into place to now. And so at any moment, it could break out again. This is not too far back in our history when you really think of it, you know? So this is extremely dangerous. It needs to be fought against. It could be in anything. We have to examine everything we know to make sure that this virus isn't in there, because you know, and we are Americans. We are individuals. We believe in individual freedom. That is what our country was built on. Okay, this is foreign and alien to us in our very DNA as Americans. Americans came to this country, especially if your ancestors were here before the beginning of the country and soon after. We came here to escape political ideologies and persecution that was happening in Europe. That's why we came here. We are frontier people. We are people who believe that we have inherent right to our own perspectives and our own agency. Okay, so this type of stuff that's being foisted on us is alien to us as Americans. And the people who came in later, like in the 1900s, they also have that same type of ideology that they wanted to be a part of when they came here. Okay, and so we need to remember that. It's extremely important. That is what makes America America.
Did Mao do? So he, first of all, he went to Tiananmen Square and met with about 1 million Red Guards in Beijing. And you
1
probably saw
million.
some.
Yeah, I've
1
seen some of
million.
this footage. Yeah.
Yes, you saw the picture of him wearing the army uniform and wave at these young people who just absolutely, they're just like seeing their God. They're ready to do anything. But that's not it. That's only about 1 million people in Beijing and around Beijing. So Mao did it 7 more times. So how did he do that? The words came out that anyone can come to Beijing to meet Mao. Mao was going to meet all these Red Guards, but travel was extremely rare in China, and it's expensive, and you can't. I can't even go into the detail that travel was absolutely a luxury. Most people growing up just within the walking distance of the where they were born. And I did not go anywhere outside my city until much later. But he gave the order. Any young kids can come to Beijing free of charge. They can go to the train, and in each city, there will be receiving stations to welcome them, feed them, put them in dorms or whatever. So 8 more million kids went to Beijing, and that is the social media of the day. They
Wow.
absolutely started to talk to each other, and then they started to learn about the lessons from those in Beijing. They're supposed to be more. They're supposed to know more. They know how to carry out this revolution. So by the time He was there 8 times for the young people over the country. Everyone was mobilized. Everyone, all the young people, all over, including people in Tibet.
Yeah, when you think about that period of time, the tech and the technology, the scale of that mobilization is just hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine,
It's hard.
I mean, I assume that in your home, you did not have electricity. Is that right?
No, we have electricity in the city, not in the
city,
countryside.
but not in the countryside,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So did you live more in the city?
I live in the city. Yes.
Okay. So what was he telling the kids to do? What was their directive?
Their directive is take down the people in power, and your principals, your teacher, your mayor, your governor, whoever in power, because that was his goal. But in the very beginning, they were giving go ahead to destroy everything that is considered old, the 4 olds, old ideas, old culture, old habits, and old custom. That means anything that's left in China that's considered old, statues, temples, churches, and mosques, books, everything. Everything has to be destroyed. And the names of the streets, most of them, the names is traditional. That's not good enough. Has to be changed. The street name changed, institution name changed.
So I want people to think about things that have been going on in our country for a while now that mirror this, taking down statues, saying that everything about our country is evil, wanting to do away with like all of our history, changing the names of things, changing some of the history of things. Um, you know, think about while you listen to her, think about all the stuff that you have been watching or seeing that you might have not noticed or that was that big of a deal. Of course, this is, happening over a longer period of time because America isn't one republic like how they are, or federation. We are a republic that's divided up into states, so that's why it's a little harder for them to accomplish their goals here. But I guarantee you that these are their goals. These are the goals of Barack Obama, Gavin Newsom, all these people, Kamala Harris, Tim Walz. I don't know why. Well, with Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, I do know why, because they were trained up by Saul Lizinski. Probably not saying that right. He wrote the book Rules for Radicals that taught them how to do all this. And this other guy, Gene Sharp, who wrote books on how to do all this. And they were radicals when they were young. And then they sort of like pretended like they weren't or whatever. But the thing is that they're doing this for power reasons. So they want to gain power, just like Mao did. He got removed from power, and so that's why he did all this, to take out all of his rivals so that he could just get in power again. And it's the same thing with all the communists in Russia and stuff. That is what it is essentially. But they brainwash everyone into thinking, and then they might even, like, Barack Obama might actually be an ideologist. It's hard to tell who is who and who's not. Some of them could be actually believe in the ideology, which then goes back to the whole concept of having to create a new man so that God can then see himself reflected back to him, to himself. So, and then we would live in a utopia. And that's why so many people have to die, because so many people just won't do it. You know what I mean? So they have to get like rid of them. But so it's sort of like an overlapping thing. Look, I'm going to be real honest with you guys. If I can't get people to subscribe or like, YouTube will literally send aliens to my house. Do you want me to be probed? I need you to like and to subscribe. Thank you. But anyway.
and the kids start to change their own names to be politically correct. They changed their name from traditional name into revolutionary name.
Give me an
And so-
example of that. What was it? What was a revolutionary name? Like,
Okay. For example, in the street, we have a place that's called Chunxi District. Chunxi means spring splendor. It's just a nice name, you know. That's no that is changing into anti-imperialism road or revolutionary road.
I'm
And,
laughing, but it's all horrible. But
it's absolutely. You can even find footage of Red Guards changing the street names, take down the sign and put the new sign there. They're all revolutionary. And the names of the personal names, like my name is Xi, okay? Xi means west. That was problematic in the eyes of the Red Guards. West, what do you mean? You mean West? Western power, Western imperialism, and I was pressured to change my name. And fortunately, my parents said, tell your friends or the Red Guards that your name is from the city you were born, Xi'an. That was the Asian capital. But my friends, left and right, changed their names into something like Red Guards. Red Guards is a popular name. And so there was a story of this young man. He changed his name from whatever into Red Guard with his parents' approval. And then later, he reported his mother at home in private setting, complaining about Mao, and report to the party. And his mom was arrested, and 2 months later was executed. So that was how. I don't even know the word for it. It's absolutely insanity. Everyone wants to prove themselves to be revolutionary. And so, and mostly it's the people that are supposed to be weaker, they will prove that they are strong. So the first killing took place and during the Cultural Revolution in Beijing's girls' middle school. So a bunch of girls from 12 to 16.
Okay, listen to this really closely. The first killings that took place was in a girls' middle school of 12-year-old to 16-year-old girls that brutally started killing their teachers and stuff.
They got their principal on the stage, denounced her, beat her up, and killed her. And that was the first killing during the Cultural Revolution. Cultural Revolution started in May 1966. And then the killing took place in August 1966. Only 3 years, only 3 months. So during that 3 months, it started with destroying statues, changing names, burning books, to killing.
in a very real sense, like teenagers, young adults, I mean, they're just they're very receptive to this because they're the new generation. They don't want to listen. It's not fun to be told what to do by older people that in authority. Seems like a big part of what Mao was doing, and frankly, what our school system has done that follows him, when in different ways, was just preying on this like sort of teenage angst, like this youthful zeal to want to be the new thing and out with the old, in with the new. We're the new generation. That I don't need to listen to you because you're my parents and you don't know anything. It's like, how much, like, is that how you understand why young people took to this? Is that not really? Was there something else going on?
That's part of it. That's part of it. But I think the real reason is Mao gave them the power. Mao openly on the Tiananmen Square tower said he said, "You are my Red Guards. I'm your Red Commander in Chief. I am behind you. I support you. That means I grant you the permission to do whatever its power. It's when they know that they have the backing of Mao, they could do anything and no one can stop them. And you would ask, well, where are the police? Well, there's no such thing as defund the police. The police were totally dismantled. There's no police.
Okay, so all the time, defund the police. Now they're saying they want to get rid of ICE, and which we just read all the stuff that they do, which is pretty important. And then literally, I think on Friday, the Democrats will not sign a budget bill unless the ICE or the Homeland Security or whatever part of the budget is taken out of it so that they can put all these restrictions on ICE that, and they're using the optics and the uproar they have created with their foot soldiers in Minneapolis and other places to use as an example of why this needs to be done. So they're refusing to sign the bill. The restrictions and everything they want to put on ICE would basically make it impossible for ICE to do their job. So do you see what I'm saying? Like, this is planned. It doesn't, you can put all these facts together and actually make a picture. You know what I mean? Like, it's not that complicated, really.
And so they could do whatever. So all you need to do is to wear a badge, said Red Guards, and you have the power to destroy, you have the power to kill. Many young kids killed people just because they could.
As I understand it, the Red Guard got too crazy even for Mao. Is that right?
That is okay. I have to go back a little bit with the story. The first group of the Red Guards, the ones that destroyed the statues and destroyed temples and churches, and went after people who were already labeled enemy of the state. But they soon learned that's not really Mao's intention. Mao's intention actually were their parents. So the first group of Red Guards were the children of the elites. Okay, so they said, yeah, they thought that's about destroying the tradition, destroying the past, and but no, and then they realized their parents were Mao's real target. By then, more other people, by then, Red Guards were no longer elite organization. So other people joined in. Those people were the victims of those CCP elites. They hate those CCP elites who have to rule over them, like the new ruling class. So they really went after those leaders, so-called political leaders, and absolutely violently just went after them. I saw the struggle session of the governor of my province.
What was that?
So understand what she's saying. So as the thing went on, the other people, the lower class people, they began attacking in their own group the ones that they saw that were above them, which then included what they considered the elite or even like middle class or whatever. And then also they started attacking them and killing them. So that's sort of like how it goes.
Like what happened?
So they have a big stage. So in that particular setting, and there was a steps leads to an entrance of a big hall. So he was on the top, and then he has to wear a big sign, and the sign has his name on it and used in crossed out, and he was called the capitalist, the number one capitalist ruler of Sichuan province. So I was too young to understand that they're reading all this, like a denunciation. He did this, this, and this, and this. All this is against Mao, and then he put on the truck, and then they parade him around the city. And so that happened almost daily. Someone will be on the truck, and and it's all those people in position of power because they were Mao's enemy, and all the people that got them were the Red Guards. Does it make sense?
It does. I mean, none of it really makes sense, but it it just reminds me of this this thing that is just dark and hard for a lot of people to accept with it, which is that every person has within them sort of dark capability. It's like, so there's the quote from Solzhenitsyn, the Soviet writer, that the line between good and evil cuts through the heart of every man. Like we all have good and evil in us.
That
The Bible talks about that too. So the Bible says that the heart of every man is wicked, who can know it? And that's basically what it's saying, is that we all have the potential to become like it's like a razor edge, you know what I mean? And so that's why we have to be so careful. That's why these things are so dangerous. The stuff that you're seeing in these places that are actually getting pretty violent, that could spill over at any minute and get a million times worse. I mean, it could take just no time at all. So these things are very dangerous.
is absolutely the demonstration that the kids, I mean, seemingly normal kids, turned into killers pretty much overnight.
Yes, it sounds like Lord of the Flies. It's just a total animalistic behavior. The going after your parents is so hard to imagine, because it's such a close bond.
Here is really, people need to understand, when you're indoctrinated, you absolutely could not think. So once your parents were denounced, you don't have a choice but denouncing them. So there's a lot of stories and of kids join the Red Guards and beat up, even kill their parents. Because you don't have a choice. If you try to, okay, here is the story of my governor, not my governor, but the governor of the province. So he was repeatedly struggled against, going through the struggle session for about 100 times or something like that. And his son was attending college in Beijing. He want to defend his father. He basically said, my father was not against Mao. He was a good comrade. He was a good communist. He was beaten to death. And before he died, he was dragged to the crematory and burned pretty much alive.
Okay, so she's saying the guy who was defending his dad, that's what happened to him, that he was all that stuff and then burned and all that. Not so the guy who stood up for his father, so that's what would happen to you if you did, right?
That's what happened to you if you want to defend your parents who were denounced by Mao. That's what happened to you.
It's it's a true reign of absolute terror. And we had done a video about the aftermath of the French Revolution, which had similar reigns of terror. Robespierre, the Jacobins.
So that's what I mean. Like these ideologies, they go back. So that was the same ideologies that influenced that revolution that turned into the reign of terror and killed all those people. It's all the same thing. It all comes from the same place. Even the Night of Long Knives, I believe that was a fascist thing, but the fascists, like I have said before, people don't understand. what fascism actually is, like in totalitarian, like completely understand, because fascism is just almost exactly the same as communists, but just twisted a little bit. And so it is actually a leftist ideology. So when people say that fascist is right wing, it's not right wing. It's not right wing at all. If you know what right wing is, it has nothing to do with that in reality. Like, so they were socialists. People say, oh, that was just a name. No, they were socialist. They were national socialists. That is of the left. And they had very similar ideas. They just implemented them in different ways as the communists. And their ideology goes back to the same philosopher. So, like, their thought leaders, right, got the same ideas from the same philosopher that the communists did, but they just interpreted it in a slightly different way. Just like the classical liberals also got a lot of their ideology from the same place, but they interpreted it in a completely different way. Do you see what I'm saying? But and so they went like a completely outside of the box because they were also influenced by other philosophers, and like Aristotle and, Greek philosophy, where the other ones had other influences on them, but they all sort of come back. So the liberals would be like the right wing, right? They continued on into like liberty and freedom and made the American Revolution, which worked out pretty well, but the other ones didn't. But it all comes from the same place. So these people, these ideologies go way back to like the Enlightenment period, and then the stuff that the people in the Enlightenment period were reading to come up with their ideas goes back into the occult in ancient times.
It's so funny. There was this Jacobin magazine was started here in the U.S. after the financial crisis in 2008. Oh, we're Jacobin magazine. It's like they're celebrating this like murder band that killed over 20,000 people in the aftermath of the French Revolution. Just basically like it's like the same people. It's the elders, anyone that had accomplished anything. How much of it was just jealousy? It seems like it's very direct. This activity was all directed at those who are older or in any kind of position of authority. So was he really tapping into just jealousy to stoke this violence?
I think so. And this is something that a lot of people overlooked. Why Mao could mobilize so many people in the beginning, it was kids in college or high school or elementary school. Later, the factory workers join in, mostly young people, because they absolutely hate those who have been ruling over them. So do you see that?
Yeah.
Mao knew that those people hate those party leaders, party bosses, at every level. That's why those people just absolutely joined in and really took those people they hate without mercy. I think it's not envy; it is resentment and hatred, and so eventually 20-some million people lost their lives during the Cultural Revolution.
It seems like
27 million people. That was just for the Cultural Revolution part. So, and she said it was extreme hatred. So think about how the left feels about us if you're not on the left, or if you're moderate left, or, I'm saying, like, or if you're libertarian. They just kind of classify everybody to the right of them as the right, whatever. So they do not like us. They like hate us. They say crazy. There's things you can see online. Like I saw something the other day that said like this guy was dressed like how they are, so he looked like one of them, and he went up to like a house with the flags and all that and was like, "Oh, hey, I'm taking a survey and for blah blah blah, can I ask you some questions?" And it was all about like, "Oh, do you support conservatives and people on the right wearing badges to indicate that they're conservative?" And they're like, "Oh yeah." And then they were like, "Oh, do you support putting them in camps to like re-educate them, or like concentration camps?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, we should totally do that. I support that 100%." And like just all these questions like that, which were basically like implying like what the Nazis did or whatever. So and then there's just like all the reactions after Charlie Kirk, the blue sky, the just the horrible hatred, but that you see from these people. And it's kind of scary when you know history and stuff. It's kind of like, I don't know, man. I don't like that or whatever.
Like there's like a leap that's made here. I'm grappling with this a little bit because it's just like hearing you talk about it, and it's just so disturbing. It just is like the stuff of pure nightmares. It's hard to imagine it happening as an American. Even with the craziness of 2020 and the BLM riots and burning, it's still like that. It still is just it's so small in comparison. Like
No, it's only that it echoed to the Cultural Revolution. No, it's not, and it's the beginning of the Cultural Revolution was like that. But I just said that that did not take that long, only about 3 months into actual violence. And so after 2 years, the Red Guards pretty much finished the job. Every person in power that disproved by Mao, usually it's like you can't even argue. It's just if you're in power, a position of power, you're out. So in 2 years, they did that. And then what happened? They thought, well, we did this for Mao. Now it's time for us to think about getting a seat at the table. That's how they thought. They started to fight each other for power. And that was the time that China was descent into civil war. In the beginning, it was sticks, rocks, or just bare hands. They took down those capitalist rulers. But when they start to fight each other, they absolutely raided the military bases, and they got real guns, and they got tanks, and start to fight each other. And that's when the time that it's not safe for us to go out street at all. And so one day a bullet landed just below our window when we were having dinner. And it's just a straight bullet. It's just like a killing, it's like a random. It's just, but eventually it got so out of control. Mao said, that's enough. Enough is enough. So he sent the military to take care of the most violent faction. I don't know how many tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands were killed, this time by the military. And so then eventually he summoned the leaders, Red Guard leaders in Beijing, and say, you disappointed me. And now you're out, and no more Red Guards. And send all of them to the countryside to get their re-education. That's what happened to the useful idiots that I so badly want people, the Antifas or BMMers, to learn.
Yeah,
This
this
is
is the
going to happen
thing.
to them.
This is the thing that seems to be it recurs throughout the history of communism, is that you just have these. And I mean, people like Lenin, I think it's Lenin who coined the term useful idiots, if I remember correctly.
Yes, yes, yeah.
It's transparent that you're just being used for the power.
Okay, so I will leave that video linked in the description so you guys can watch the whole thing. It's very interesting, but I just think that there are a lot of similarities and it's just really disturbing to me. So, um, here's the thing. If we break down Law and Order, like End ICE, who literally helps get rid of violent criminals and traffickers like the left is promoting, we do, then things will devolve very quickly in a very bad way. It's already getting so bad that this is actually happening now. So wait until you see this. Let me pull it up. Okay, so the caption is Long Beach Mayor candidate Rogelio Martinez has called on all 55 gang leaders in the city to team up to remove ICE agents. Okay, now listen to this. Here you see Long Beach City Hall behind him.
My name is Rogelio Martinez. I am calling all 55 gangs in my beautiful city. I expect a gang leader from every gang, all 55 gangs, and I'm not going to name them by name, but I'm calling the Latino gangs. I'm calling the Cambodian gangs. I'm calling the Filipino gangs. I'm calling the black gangs. I'm calling the Pacific Islander gangs. I'm calling all gang leaders to meet me right here, Long Beach City Hall, this coming Monday. Why Monday? Specifically, I need you to be here to meet me in person to take back this city. Because our leadership is not doing anything about it, and our police are powerless. Once again, let me be very clear. My name is Rogelio Martinez, your 2026 Long Beach City Mayor, and I need your help. I need to see 55 gang leaders here this coming Monday. We need to take back the city. Enough is enough. ICE needs to get out of Long Beach. And this is the only way that I know how to get them out. Peacefully, but with strong force. But peacefully. And remember, the police are not at fault. The police are not doing anything wrong. I'm not here to defund the police. I stand with my Long Beach police officers, my men and women that serve the Long Beach Police Department. But they are powerless. They are powerless against ICE. I need your help. I need all 55 gang leaders to meet me here this coming Monday. And we need to take back Long Beach. Enough is enough. We cannot have any more innocent people be taken and detained.
Okay, so that's crazy. I mean, this is just insanity. So, look, this is a huge topic. I didn't want to get into everything around it, but I wanted to show how to step back and think about things to sum it all up. I find all this extremely disturbing. I am for laws and for order. I am for the way that the republic, the constitutional republic, is set up for the democracy that people vote their representatives in. Those representatives make laws and then they authorize the power of the people to, of agencies or police forces to enforce those laws. That is the way that our government works. That is how it has been set up for quite some time. ICE has been operating under every president before Trump, and there was never any issues with that. Um, the government isn't doing anything illegal by detaining people, and if they don't have a right to keep them, then they will be released. I have been detained by police and then released before. I'm still alive, everything is fine. And if they are illegal and they have a deportation order, then they will be removed from the country. That is legal, that is lawful. It is literally what we voted for them to do, actually. And so that actually is democracy. If there is 30 million or so people in the country illegally, it's going to be a bit chaotic. It's going to look a bit chaotic at times, especially if there are uncooperative people that are being detained at times. It's going to get rough. That's just the way that it is. It's not going to be all sunshine and roses, and it is sad in some situations, of course, but you cannot have a country without borders and proper laws that deal with this type of a thing. The reason you are having all these issues, or that we're having all these issues in certain places like Minnesota, is because the state authorities aren't assisting ICE. In every other place in the country, besides these few places, the state law enforcement apprehends and holds them, and ICE just comes in and picks them up from the jails. These cities like Minneapolis are forcing them to have to go into the community themselves to apprehend the people they're looking for. Again, to agitate the population is why the cities are doing this. They also have an app that they created, the federal government, that illegals can use to deport themselves. They can get a free plane ticket, and then they're eligible and return to their country of origin, and then they're actually eligible to apply to return legally the proper way if they take this offer that's being offered. So the whole thing is literally all nonsense. It's terrible. Americans are getting hurt. It's all being used as a psyop, and that's what I think. But you guys can come up with your own conclusions and let me know what you guys think in the comment section. All the links that were used in this video will be included in the description box. And don't forget to like and subscribe. That's the end of that video, and I'll see you next time on The Eclectic Journalist.